Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to tell you a story drawn from a single source. It's a YouTube transcript that recounts the really harrowing experience of a young woman named Erwiana Sulistyaningsih.
Yeah, and this story, it starts with something universal, really, a dream for a better future, especially wanting an education.
Exactly. But it descends very quickly into, well, a nightmare of abuse and exploitation. So our aim today is to walk through the key details of Erwiana's journey, unpack the systemic issues it brought to light, and also touch on the, frankly, unexpected global impact her case had.
And this source, it's incredibly detailed. It really lays out the personal struggles, connects them to those wider issues faced by so many migrant workers, things like the agencies, the employer relationships.
Yeah.
It's a tough look at vulnerability.
But also resilience, as you said.
Absolutely. Incredible resilience.
Okay, let's get into the story then, starting with Erwiana's beginnings, her background, and that initial dream she had.
Right. So Erwiana was born January 7, 1991. Small village, East Java, Indonesia.
And the source emphasizes her family was very poor. Her father, a landless farmer, renting land, growing chilies mostly. His income was incredibly low, something like, 10,000 baht a year?
Yeah, less than 1,000 baht a month. It's hard to imagine. Her mother was working as a helper in Brunei, thankfully, sending money back. That helped keep them afloat.
But even with those struggles, education was clearly a priority for her parents.
Very much so. They pushed Erwiana and her younger brother to study. Erwiana managed to finish high school, but university.
Yeah.
Well, the cost was just out of reach for them then.
Right. So Erwiana had this dream, not just for herself, but to help her family. She wanted to go to university and, crucially, help her younger brother get there, too.
And higher education was already a challenge where she lived. The nearest university, the source says, was 2 hours away. So working seemed like the only path forward, really, to save money.
So at 17, she moves to Jakarta.
Gets a job as a waitress. But the conditions sound brutal. 6 days a week, 8 a.m., often until midnight, sometimes even 3 a.m.
And the pay, something like 20 baht an hour.
Barely enough to live on in Jakarta, let alone save anything significant or send much home. It was a real grind.
It's while she's there, in Jakarta, that she hears about Hong Kong. Friends tell her she could earn a lot more as a domestic helper.
Yeah, and Hong Kong had this image, didn't it? Developed, safe, good pay compared to what she was making. Plus, her own mother was working abroad, so the idea probably felt more achievable.
It seemed like a real chance to finally pursue that education dream.
So after about 2 years in Jakarta, this would be 2012, she contacts an agency, PT Agung Ayu Karsa. The source identifies it as a legal recruitment agency based in Tangerang, specializing in placing Indonesian helpers in Hong Kong.
She wasn't alone. There were about 300 other young women applying with her.
And they all had to go through this 8-month training period in Indonesia first. Basic Cantonese, cooking, cleaning, child and elderly care, the essentials.
The agency promised a salary around 18,000 baht a month in Hong Kong, plus food and accommodation provided by the employer, which, on the surface, sounds like a good deal, easy to save money.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one, the source highlights. They had to sign a contract. This contract allowed the agency to deduct their salary for the first 6 months to cover training costs.
And the total amount was huge, 80,000 baht. It's like 13,000 baht deducted each month.
Which, as the source points out, was way, way more than the legal limit in Indonesia. The law there says agencies can only deduct 10% maximum, specifically to stop this kind of debt bondage.
And you have to remember, Erwiana and the others, they were mostly from poor backgrounds, limited education, limited access to information. They likely had no idea this was illegal exploitation.
Exactly. And even with that huge deduction, the roughly 5,000 baht left over per month was still more than she was earning in Jakarta for those crazy hours. It shows the kind of desperate choices people face.
And the exploitation during training didn't end there. The source mentions they were forced to work for free in different homes for experience.
And horrifyingly, Erwiana actually experienced physical abuse from an elderly employer during that training period in Indonesia.
But the agency just warned her off, told her not to say anything or she wouldn't get to go to Hong Kong.
That's just awful. It set such a dangerous precedent, doesn't it? Teaching her silence, showing the agency wouldn't protect her. Her dream was essentially held hostage.
So, despite all that, feeling anxious but still hopeful, she flies to Hong Kong, alone, May 27, 2013.
The Indonesian agency gave her minimal support, basically just said, contact our partner agency in Hong Kong if there are problems. Chan Asia Recruitment Center, these agency networks can be so murky.
She arrives and is initially struck by Hong Kong, the luxury, the modernity. Very different from her village. She's given a pamphlet at the airport in Indonesian explaining her rights as a migrant worker.
But almost immediately, the representative from the Hong Kong agency takes it away, confiscates it, tells her she won't need it.
That's a huge red flag, isn't it?
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes this. It wasn't an accident. It was about keeping her ignorant, keeping her dependent, disempowering her right from the start.
She's then taken to an apartment, Song Kwan O, described as a luxurious area. And there she meets her employer, Wan-tung, 44 years old.
Erwiana's first impression, according to the source, unfriendly, irritable, very different in how she treated Erwiana compared to her own children.
Law lived there with her teenage son Edmund, 18, and daughter Kelly. Her husband wasn't around. They were separated.
And then the abuse began, almost immediately. The source details are chilling. First step. Law takes Erwiana's phone and passport.
Total control. Complete isolation from the outside world.
Then the work schedule. It's almost unbelievable. She was only allowed 3 to 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
That was in the afternoon.
The rest of the time, working, day and night. The source even mentions being forced to clean the front door at 3 a.m. so neighbors wouldn't see her constantly working.
No proper room either. She slept on the floor in a storage room. Just a pillow and a blanket.
Law was apparently obsessed with cleanliness, constant supervision, watching her, CCTV cameras.
And tasks were timed. Like, wipe the TV in exactly 5 minutes. Too fast. Punishment. Too slow. Punishment. Fined if anything got damaged.
And the food situation was just barbaric. 2 meals a day, one before her short sleep, one after waking up.
And what meals? Just few slices of bread, maybe leftovers from the family. She was constantly hungry, tried to sneak food sometimes.
But she'd get caught, threatened with the police, deportation. The source even says Law's kids would report her for trying to get food from another helper nearby, leading to more verbal abuse from Law.
The restrictions were extreme. Only allowed 2 bathroom visits per day. Law claimed it was about cleanliness.
And to enforce that, she limited Erwiana's water intake to just 450 milliliters a day. Purposeful dehydration.
No days off. Never allowed outside the apartment. Ever. She never saw Hong Kong, never met anyone. Her only flicker of hope was thinking about getting paid eventually.
But after the first month, no salary came. Law just said the agency deducted it all. Erwiana started to suspect something was seriously wrong.
She felt completely trapped. No phone, no passport, didn't know the city, knew no one. But she remembered what the Indonesian agency said, call the Hong Kong partner if there's trouble.
Somehow, she managed to sneak out to the lobby, find a phone, and make that call. She told them everything, the lack of food, sleep, the missing pay.
And the agency's response. According to the source, they just dismissed her, told her to go back to work, refused to help her change employers. Utterly useless.
And then Wan-tung found out she'd made the call. The source suggests the agency probably told her.
And that's when things escalated. Horrifically. The abuse went from deprivation and verbal attacks to outright physical violence. Brutal beatings. Punching.
Punished violently for the smallest things, like punched in the mouth for nodding off while working, pulled off a ladder while cleaning the air conditioning, hitting her head.
The source suggests it wasn't even really about her work anymore. It seemed more like Law was just venting her own anger onto Erwiana.
And the children, they didn't help. They sided with their mother, reported her. Law started using objects to beat her. Broom handles.
There's one incredibly disturbing incident the source describes. Law took the suction pipe off a vacuum cleaner, forced it into Erwiana's mouth, twisted it. The metal edge cut her lip, made her bleed. It's torture.
Pure torture. Another instance. Forced to strip naked, have water thrown on her, then stand in front of a fan for nearly 2 hours as punishment for falling asleep.
Her body was just covered in injuries. Bruises, open wounds that weren't healing, difficulty breathing, headaches constantly.
Her skin was blistering, peeling from contact with bleach because Law wouldn't let her wear gloves. Said she wouldn't clean properly with them. Her knees were constantly bruised from kneeling.
After 8, maybe 9 months of this, Erwiana's health just completely collapsed. Severe malnutrition, the stress, the untreated injuries, infections. The source even uses the word gangrene for some wounds.
Her weight dropped to about 30 kilos. She stopped menstruating. Then her ankle broke. She couldn't walk. Had to use diapers.
At that point, Law decided to send her home. Not out of compassion, clearly. Erwiana was useless to her now, and apparently her wounds swelled.
Law tried to do it secretly, avoiding the agency. Threatened Erwiana's family back in Indonesia if she ever spoke about what happened.
Before taking her to the airport, this was early January 2014, Law tried to cover everything up, wrap the wounds, dressed Erwiana in 6 layers of clothes, put makeup on her face. Her son apparently thought she looked okay.
Just unbelievable. They took a taxi to the airport. Law, her kids, Erwiana. The taxi driver later reported noticing a terrible smell, urine, feces, the infected wounds.
At the airport, Law gave her just 60 Hong Kong dollars, about 200 baht, repeated the threats one last time, and then just left her there. Alone, barely able to move.
Abandoned her. It's hard to even imagine that level of cruelty.
And the state she must have been in. Alone, injured, terrified, in a huge foreign airport.
But then something crucial happens, a turning point. Erwiana, struggling, meets another Indonesian helper, Riantri, who was also heading home. But Riantri had had a good experience, a good employer.
Riantri saw her, saw the injuries, the emaciation. Erwiana, still terrified, initially lied, said it was allergies, old scars.
But Riantri was compassionate. She persisted gently, and Erwiana finally broke down and told her the truth about the abuse.
And Riantri's reaction was immediate. She changed her own flight so she could travel with Erwiana, help her through the whole airport process, stayed with her on the journey home. An incredible act of kindness.
Absolutely vital. When they got back to Indonesia, her family and friends were just horrified. The source says they described her as being near death.
Even then, Erwiana's first thought was the cost. She didn't want to go to the hospital, didn't want to burden her parents.
But her parents insisted. They cried, and Erwiana later said their tears felt worse than the physical abuse she'd endured.
She was taken to hospital Uncle Solo. The diagnosis confirmed the extent of the horror. Brain swelling from beatings, broken teeth, broken nose, burns, necrotic tissue, infections everywhere. And deep emotional trauma, obviously.
Riantri didn't just leave her then. She stayed involved, helped with physiotherapy, became an advocate for her.
And Riantri noted something important the source includes. Abuse cases like Erwiana's weren't isolated incidents. They were known to happen. Erwiana's story was maybe just the tip of the iceberg.
This is when it explodes into public view. Riantri and her friends took photos of Erwiana's injuries, posted them online.
And they went viral. Globally. Sparked immediate outrage. Huge discussions started in Indonesia, in Hong Kong.
The pressure built incredibly fast. The Indonesian president at the time, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, called Erwiana and her family directly, expressed his anger, contacted Hong Kong leaders, pushed for better conditions for workers.
And the agency, PT Agung Ayu Karsa, just vanished, basically. Stopped responding to media. Faced very few immediate consequences, it seems.
Erwiana's case really threw a spotlight on the situation for the huge number of domestic helpers in Hong Kong, over 300,000 Indonesian and Filipino women around that time, 2014.
Yeah, reports started surfacing, detailing all the common problems. Lack of freedom, exploitation, abuse, physical and sexual, not enough food, awful living conditions, working insane hours, like over 70 hours a week.
And many were either unaware of their rights or just too scared to report anything. Compounded by a perception that police weren't always eager to investigate cases involving migrant workers.
Public anger turned into street action. January 19, 2014. Around 5,000 people, workers, activists protested in Hong Kong, demanding justice for Erwiana, demanding legal changes.
A key demand mentioned in the source was allowing helpers to live outside their employers' homes, recognizing how the live-in requirement enables that isolation and abuse. They marched, chanted, "We are workers, not slaves, justice for Erwiana."
And Erwiana herself, still recovering, released a statement, thanking everyone for the support. Importantly, she said she forgave Wan-tung personally, but she wanted the legal system to deliver justice. She saw her fight as being for all helpers.
Then another former helper of Wan-tung came forward, reported similar abuse from years before. Said Law had even nearly pushed her off a balcony once.
This mounting pressure, the public outcry, it forced the Hong Kong police to act decisively. They launched a full criminal investigation. Sent investigators to Indonesia to interview Erwiana formally. They also got testimony from two other former helpers who'd worked for Law back in 2010, 2011. It revealed a clear pattern.
Wan-tung tried to flee. She was arrested on January 24th, 2014 at Hong Kong airport, apparently trying to get a flight to Bangkok.
She was charged with 21 offenses: assault, criminal intimidation, failure to pay wages, denying rest days, not providing insurance. A long list.
And the global recognition continued. In April 2014, just months after her story broke, Erwiana Sulistyaningsih was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people.
Incredible recognition. Time highlighted how she inspired others facing similar situations, how she advocated for change, how she drew attention to the plight of vulnerable groups. They said courageous people like her, speaking for the voiceless, can create real change.
The trial started in January 2015, lasted about 6 weeks. Erwiana, despite everything, traveled back to Hong Kong to testify. A very difficult thing to do, but crucial.
Wan-tung pleaded not guilty to almost everything. Her defense was, hell, quite something. Claimed Erwiana was mentally ill, made it all up for attention, injuries were accidental, law offered help, but Erwiana refused, worked extra voluntarily.
Her children backed up her story. The defense lawyer basically accused Erwiana of fabricating the whole thing.
But the evidence was overwhelming. The medical records, the photos, Erwiana's testimony, the testimony from the other former helpers. The judge completely rejected Law's claims. Said it was impossible Erwiana could inflict those kinds of injuries on herself to fake a story.
The judge's comments were quite pointed. Said Law showed a lack of empathy, contempt for those she saw as beneath her, and sadly noted that kind of attitude towards helpers wasn't uncommon in Hong Kong.
The verdict came on February 27, 2015. Guilty. On 19 out of the 21 charges.
The sentence was 6 years in prison, a fine of 15,000 Hong Kong dollars, and she was ordered to pay Erwiana about 32,000 Hong Kong dollars in back wages.
Erwiana was there in court, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Justice and End Slavery." She expressed happiness with the guilty verdict, though she did say she felt the sentence could have been longer. She had a brief celebration with supporters outside.
And she confirmed then she wouldn't go back to being a helper. Her health wouldn't allow it. But she was determined to pursue her original dream studying.
The legal battles weren't quite over, though. Law appealed in 2016. It was denied. She had to pay more legal costs, too.
And then there was a civil case in 2017. The court ordered Law to pay Erwiana substantial damages around 890,000 Hong Kong dollars, which is like 3.6 million baht. Another former worker also won damages.
Law apparently tried to avoid paying by transferring property to her estranged husband, but the court saw through that maneuver.
But then, the source points out, Wan-tung was released from prison in 2018. She served about 3.5 years of the 6-year sentence.
Yeah, and in 2021, she was declared bankrupt, which could complicate or even prevent Erwiana and the other worker from ever receiving the full compensation they were awarded. The agency involved reportedly closed for just 3 months, then reopened under a new name. Minimal consequences, it seems.
But here's the really powerful part, the counterpoint to all that. The source emphasizes this as Erwiana's ultimate victory. In 2018, the same year, her abuser was released.
Erwiana graduated from university with honors, a bachelor's in economics. On a full scholarship back in Indonesia, she achieved the dream.
Absolutely. She overcame unimaginable trauma, PTSD. The source describes her now as confident, knowledgeable about labor law, a fierce advocate for migrant workers' rights.
She's become a speaker, works with organizations like UN Women. She's even planning her own foundation to support migrant workers.
And her perspective on prevention is key, isn't it? It's not just about punishing abusers after the fact.
Exactly. She talks about the need for widespread education access back home, decent jobs with living wages in places like Indonesia, comprehensive public health care even in rural areas. Fundamentally, she believes all workers deserve dignity, shouldn't face discrimination.
Her case is technically closed, but she remains this incredibly potent symbol and a real force for change in Indonesia, and hopefully inspiring change elsewhere too.
It's such a stark journey the source lays out. From that initial hope for education to that pit of suffering, but then emerging with such resilience, finding justice, and becoming this powerful voice.
Yeah, and it really forces you, doesn't it, to look at the systemic failures, the predatory agencies, the way isolation enables abuse, the power imbalances, but also the impact of public pressure and the sheer courage of individuals like Wan-tung stepping up and Erwiana herself finding her voice.
It absolutely does. It highlights how easily people in vulnerable situations can just fall through the cracks if those systems aren't robust and protective.
It definitely makes you pause and consider the hidden realities behind domestic work globally. Thinking about this story, what steps do you think need to be taken? By individuals, yes, but more systemically, by agencies, by governments, to really ensure the safety and dignity of all workers.
And Erwiana's focus on opportunity and education back home. It pushes us to think upstream, doesn't it? How do we build societies where people aren't forced by economic necessity into potentially dangerous situations abroad in the first place?
It's a story with deep, lasting implications. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material today. We hope it's given you a clearer, perhaps more informed perspective on these complex issues.